Hello, welcome to Happy Times and Places. I shan't be negative about any episode of Doctor Who that I watch. I accentuate the positive and see if I can guess what my special guests' favourite things about their nominated story are.
Hi there, this is Annie Wallace here. I play Sally Sinclair on Channel 4's Hollyoaks. So, when Toby asked me which story would I like to talk about, I had a big think, and I have chosen Planet of the Spiders.
Well, hello everybody. It's time for episode 4 of Planet of the Spiders. I had a bit of a lapse last episode where I failed to choose the spiders. This is the best thing of episode 3, which I think on balance I probably should have done. Well, on balance and on account of the fact that that's what our super special guest Annie Wallace did choose. So, but also I think I struggled a little bit to keep it relevant and also to do the thing that I'm supposed to be doing here, which is to accentuate the positive. I do find life on Metabilis 3 tricky. I won't be moving there anytime soon. The locals don't speak my language. Well, I mean, they speak my language, but they don't speak it very convincingly, and a couple of them don't do anything very convincingly at all. And there's a lot of noisy CSO, which would distract me from my work. But anyway, let's see if Planet of the Spiders episode 4, now that we've got over the culture shock of the Metabilis blues, let's see if we can enjoy what is being offered by part 4. Okay, in 3, 2, 1. Oh, no. Let's see if we can enjoy part 4 of Planet of the Spiders. I think the real shock of Planet of the Spiders actually is that for Pertwee's last story, these last 3 episodes, production-wise, have a bit of a mare because, I mean, the CSO that we can see is pretty grotty. Some of it was so bad that Barry Letts decided not to use it, which meant that these 3 episodes all come in massively under time. So none of them have got the right cliffhangers. Lots of them have a lot of repeat material from previous episodes. And so we've got 3 episodes now, which probably have material for 2 and a little bit, and that's a shame because that must have been for all for the hard work that they've done, for the whole of the era. And what's interesting is I think the reason that was a surprise to me is because Doctor Who production people had been doing interviews for quite a while now, and talked about the Pertwee era and how it ended, and how this might have had Delgado in it and all this sort of stuff, but there was never until we got into much more detail later on in DVD ranges and things like that, we were never given the impression, we were given the impression that Ambassadors of Death was a tricky production. Actually, I don't think that shows as much as shows here, and in fact I think Ambassadors had the opposite effect to me, is that when I watched Ambassadors, which I was expecting to be a mess, I was amazed at what an absolutely fantastic production it is. Whereas this one, Barry Letts, I'd never sort of read a kind of, we did this final story with these giant spiders, and the giant spiders effects were this, and we did this, and we took him to Metabilis 3, and blah, blah, blah. And there was never a kind of, we had to really cobble together the last 3 episodes because we didn't have enough material, because we cut bits out because bits didn't work. So Walter Randall, by the way, I did have a theory until, because the way he says "chigan" here, I was slightly worried that for a while I had a theory that perhaps he'd put on a really sort of cod, sort of mock Tibetan kind of, or Oriental kind of accent, because of the way he says "Shigon." That I thought maybe that's the reason that he's been dubbed. But actually, when you hear him calling Arak outside and a couple of the other lines that he has, he's not doing that. That was my imagination. But I did entertain the idea that maybe he'd been dubbed because he'd been slightly offensive. But then again, I think to even though it's a game attempt, I think the same effect is really kind of had by Kevin Lindsay's accent. So that it doesn't actually hold water, but it was a theory I entertained for a while. But Walter Randall, of course, goes back to the early days. Walter Randall was a favourite of Douglas Camfield, although he was first cast by John Crockett in the Aztecs. It was South African, I think, and he had but the reason, so he's actually more associated with the Hartnell era because he's Ella Keir in The Crusade, and he's in the Daleks' Master Plan, but he's Slocum in Inferno, but he also I think he and John Pertwee had a restaurant together, or he had a restaurant, and Pertwee owned. Had a holding in it, and I know because Julian Glover told me that he used to eat there a lot. He said it was all right. So that was Walter Randall, who is then interviewed on the Aztecs DVD and hasn't done his shirt up properly, and you can see his tummy. It's a funny old thing, that. But yes. And he's an interesting actor because sometimes he's good and sometimes he's not, and I think a lot of Camfield favourites are a bit like that. Now this I think this I sometimes don't give the script of this story its credit because of course we're setting up now. I think the way that it feeds in things like this, we're re-establishing the character of Tommy, and that's useful in that scene because it's showing that Lupton's guys are worried about the absence of Lupton and they've lost their way a little bit. But Tommy interrupts them to show why they have to be a little bit furtive as well. But there's a do not disturb sign on, so Barnes says the casual thing that you say if you're angry with somebody who's interrupted something and you've got a sign outside saying, he says, "Can't you read?" And of course Tommy can't read, and then we have that little scene to re-emphasize the fact that Tommy can't read, which has become a vital importance, particularly in this episode. So I think that's very neatly woven back into the story. Gareth Hunt's a bit of a legend, isn't he? I mean, he was, by the time I was conscious of him, he was famous for the Nescafe adverts where people would shake the coffee beans. Well, good sort of recognisable actors, Diane Keane, Gareth Hunt, and so then he sort of sent up that persona a little bit later. But he'd been a good solid straight actor, and I'm sure. Is it the Michael Winner film Parting Shots, in which he's got quite a small part? But somebody. I think it got so many bad reviews, but there's one review where somebody said this film is awful, but Gareth Hunt's really good in it. So a couple of the posters had Gareth Hunt's absolutely amazing, and he's not even one of the sort of main featured actors. And I think they tried to get him for the commentary of this, but that he was quite ill and he died shortly after. I mean the commentary of this is the same people on all the episodes, and so it's slightly before my time, I was slightly annoyed when I saw Richard Molesworth, who was the comedy producer, who's a mate, I know Richard, say on a forum once, I think I prefer the commentaries that are unmoderated. And it's like, there's a bit on this one where they talk about who Gareth Hunt is, and it's clear that they're actually talking about Gareth Thomas, but they don't they don't mention Gareth Thomas by name because it's the wrong person. They're sort of going, oh yeah, he's the guy with the black curly hair who's in Blake 7. And I think Elizabeth said goes, oh yeah, I know who you mean. And they don't actually get anywhere with that conversation that takes ages. So as a listener, you're going, I know what you mean, and you're all wrong. You haven't got the producer in the boxes, whereas if a moderator was there, they'd be able to clear it up and move on. So, but of course I would say that because I moderate DVD commentaries. But I was just slightly, well, it's all very well for you to say that you prefer them without moderators, but when they don't have them, that sort of thing happens. But as I say, of course, I would say that. But I also think that slightly later in the range, we would have tried to probably got Terry Lodge in for a couple of episodes, probably got the designer in for a couple of episodes. I think early in the range they relied too often on on just the big hitters. But then again, all that said, when this was released on DVD, Elizabeth Sladen and Nicholas Courtney had both died in quite quick succession. So, you actually go, well, thank God we've got as much of them as we did. So, so it makes your own little self-indulgent complaints have a slightly different perspective. Oh, I'm being quite Buddhist, aren't I? I'm having the refreshing perspective of cleansing out my own ego in order to be much more pragmatic about things that there's no point in allowing to sting one. I do quite like there's watching this and considering this story at the sort of other side of entering recovery for alcoholism is that a lot of the sort of stuff about putting your own ego to one side and looking at things from a fresh perspective and rebirth that are very Buddhisty are also part of the things that you have to do. You don't have to do, but are the part of the process that keeps you on the straight and narrow when you're not drinking, because a lot of that is about ego and about resentment and about not letting go of things, which this story is absolutely about the opposite. It's about saying let go of things. It's about saying don't let your ego and your resentments dominate you. And I started on that track during a very important scene where Tommy has had his mind cleansed. Although God bless you, Joanna Monroe, for saying the line "squabbling like herd boys with your mother half distracted," which is about as terrible a line as you could ever have to say, and she did it very well. It's because on paper this cast on Metabilis is superb, but then I don't think they're the best written of parts. But they do their jolly best. And poor old Pertwee now is at the beginning of the sort of process of him being sort of bashed about from arsehole to breakfast time, which means that he gets he gets a proper comeuppance, as it were, which is nice. You sort of think, oh, he could regenerate at any point now. He's got a brilliant face. He looks so good on camera. But the Tommy stuff is really fascinating to me because it's something that comes from a really decent place. The character of Tommy is not patronised, except for when it's important that he's patronised to show how badly he's being treated. But he is the one decent sort of unsullied person in this, really, because of his innocence. But his innocence that he has is because he is. He has learning difficulties, so it is that is characterized as well. He's not got the mental capacity to have learned all the egregiousness that comes with being a human within society, and the things like ego and grasping for power and resentment at your boss for 25 years in insurance sales, or wanting too much knowledge or wanting a big crystal, whatever it is that are the flaws of the people here. Tommy is impervious to those things, but then the crystal does what it does to him and makes him better, in inverted commas. But of course, now when we look at aspects of disability, the idea that somebody who is disabled, the attitude is, well, people who are disabled need perhaps society to make access easier for disabled people in order that they, as they are, can contribute to society in a way that is rewarding for them and means that they become, tax-paying, capable members of society who have the same opportunities and things as everybody else. And they just need a little bit of extra help with access, whether that be physical access of ramps or with neurodiverse people, just certain access requirements that make them fitting into the workplace slightly easier for them, and it can be done with a few tweaks here and there. I quite like this bit because they've set up Arak and Tuar as sort of, Arak's the big brave one and Tuar's the slightly snivelly, complainy one, but Tuar has a moment, doesn't he, here, where Rhaegar says, what does she say? Something, Arak's not a coward. He goes, no, I don't think he is. And you sort of think, oh, that's nice that Tuar, who is a bit, they're all a bit cliched, has that little moment where he goes, no, I think I'm going to be a bit nice now. I mean, it's an extra dimension to it's a slight kink in the two-dimensionality of that character. Rafe Harless has never written back. He did Survivors with my friend Bernard Kay, and Bernard said that he was absolutely lovely and really easy to work with. And so when I wrote to Ralph for, I think, about the third time, said, I used to know Bernard Kay, and he spoke very highly of you, and he's just died, and blah, 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 blah. Still didn't hear back. And it's Rafe Harless, I think. He is a relative of the famous old actor George Harless. And he also once stood for the Green Party. So what he's doing on the blue planet, I've got no idea. He's a greenie in blues clothing. But so yes, the Tommy thing is I think the big talking point of this this episode, where I think you wouldn't portray the character like that. I'm talking about in his place in the script here. Because the idea that a disabled person has to be made better, I think, is now slightly archaic, and it's more that society has to enable disabled people to live as themselves within the society without the barriers. It's a case of lowering the barriers rather than make. And I know that there are members of the deaf community who the idea. My stepson was deaf. Had a cochlear implant, and there are members of the deaf community who see that as an awful thing because saying there's nothing wrong with being deaf, is what we are, and we deal with that, and society's got to deal with us, as we are. We have to be made better, and I can understand both sides of that argument, that a disabled person go, why do I have to become sort of more like you in order to be acceptable in society? And I think that's a great shot of the spider there in the corner. But nonetheless, I think that's beautifully lit, this scene as well. Nonetheless, within the context of the time and the fact that this is a program that is to be suitable for children, and because you didn't see many characters like this on television at the time, you still don't see enough characters like this on television. I think Tommy is a lovely character, beautifully played, and I think his transformation, which has a bit of sort of television shorthand, doesn't it? I mean, the shorthand is he talks a bit like Country Bumpkin when he's the Tommy who has learning difficulties, and when he's cured, he speaks RP, because that's the shorthand for being I'm now much smarter than I was, because listen, I talk like people from the BBC. But I think, that's actually a nice shot with the evening and the dark clouds. I don't remember that. And this nighttime lighting, actually, some of the lighting in this episode is very, very good, and I like all these big close-ups of Pertwee. And I like the fact that he's been sort of all knackered all through the night, and now that he's better, he's totally better, and he's ready to be sort of up and at it. But within those caveats of the fact that the portrayal of Tommy by the script and the production is of its time, I nonetheless think the performance of the actor and the intention behind the character are 100%, on the money. And I know that John Kane took it very seriously, and in fact, he tells the story, doesn't he, of he tested the BBC commissionaire, and that he tried to get into the BBC, but as Tommy, he wanted to make sure that he could carry off being somebody, who was socially awkward as a result of having learning difficulties, but also to see how he would be treated in that way. So that's a real commitment. I admire any actor that can sort of throw their performance into the real world, and see how it works. I'm not sure I'm that brave. I always admire street theatre people, chattering like woman at a wash place. That I don't know if it's Lex or Sloman, but I'm not sure. They've got a very high opinion of villagers and farmers. I think they all speak in sort of mouthful cliches of bad metaphors. But I love the way that the explanation of the backstory is told back and forth, so that both the Doctor and Sarah have a slice of the action, and it crosses back and forth. And I always forget that the spiders. Annie filled us in last week that the spiders they're not indigenous to Metabilis. They are Earth spiders who have been grown to gigantic size and intelligence because of the powers of the crystal and the innate qualities of the insides of the mountain on Metabilis, which is nice because it means you could have just had a planet of alien spiders, but the fact that they have the tie to Earth, it's Russell T Davies theory, isn't it? It actually, if it's an Earth colony or these people of Metabilis, they are Earth descendants rather than just not terribly convincing villagers, from the planet Zog or whatever. They have a tie to Earth, which just makes us have a bit more identification. Makes us have a bit more of a stake in it. But I like the way that storytelling, the way that the script told the story is back and forth. I like the fact that Moss just panicked and whacked Gates on the head when he'd come to sort of offer them assistance. But yeah, there's I think I've talked over it. There's a bit that John Kane does when he's doing the reading, and it kind of hits him that he can do this stuff, and he can't quite contain the emotion, that I think is a really wonderful, real, truthful bit of acting that's quite profound about somebody discovering, becoming aware of themselves, and that I find really, really touching. Yeah, it's a really interesting part of the story, and that shows that our attitudes towards the way that you would do something can change, but that doesn't sully the approach of people who did it in a different way with very good intentions and a lot of skill in a different environment. Yeah, he's very blasé, isn't he, Sarbor? He's sort of like, yeah, we're gonna get eaten by the spiders. Yeah. It's not as horrifying, I think. They're funny, these corridors, aren't they? With the sort of breakfast bars. So here's Walter Randall as the handlebar moustached guard captain. And he's going to bring John Pertwee to the end of episode 3, which I think is now, except it's not, because they've had to cut some scenes, or it's not. So Max Faulkner here, one of the heroes of the Pertwee era, a stuntman who's actually a very decent actor, doesn't get a credit in this episode because he's not in this episode, because this is now this is the next episode that has been brought forward to this episode because there's not enough there hadn't been enough action to see this episode through, and this will have a huge knock-on effect as the story continues, which means that episode 6 is largely episode 5. But Max Faulkner, he gets a very good part in the android invasion. He's Corporal Adams. He's the guy that chucks himself off the mountain, off the cliff at the beginning. But he crops up in all sorts of. He's just been in the Monster of Peladon, dying twice in one episode. Yeah, a very decent actor. Another one that I would have loved to have interviewed, but never got the chance. Never actually got hold of him. But Derek Ware said he felt he probably wouldn't have given an interview. Which is a shame because he was one of those who was always around, but nobody seemed to have picked up on. Anyway, so we have that. Yeah, what should have been a sort of slightly comedy grace note, if you like, of Planet of the Spiders. That the doctors come in. Sarah thinks she's being rescued. Oh no! Look, I've got guards behind me. Wah, wah, wah. Suddenly becomes no. This is the dramatic high point, because the actual dramatic high point still left us with too much of the episode to go, and the BBC wouldn't have been happy. And I think I'm right in saying that's because there were certain exterior scenes that Barry Letts decided weren't working at all. But yeah, it all gets a bit messy. But within all of that mess, I think there was plenty there that was really, really nicely done. I liked the storytelling, going back and forth. I thought that was a very neat way of doing doing the backstory from the two different perspectives. Hang on, shush. Sorry, there's a slight cut there because the thing was going doolally. So look, I got slightly distracted at a couple of moments there that I really liked. I liked Lupton sitting with his spider. And I like the rivalry that Lupton Spider has with the Queen Spider. I like the fact there's a bit of spider politics. It stops them being, just a sort of boring melee of arachnids. But I'd forgotten. I thought maybe Lupton had done his best stuff, but I think him sort of rather arrogantly sitting on the spider chaise longue or whatever it is rather a nice image. I like anything in Doctor Who that is a juxtaposition of the ordinary and the extraordinary, and a man in a roll neck sweater and a tweed jacket sitting amongst a load of animated talking spiders, but in a way that sort of revels in that. I love that image, and I like the way John Dirth comports himself there. But the bit, and I'm very familiar with it, so I'm sort of kicking myself for talking about different things during it and not paying it its proper dues. So apologies to those of you who were watching along, and I was going off on another tangent, or probably tying myself up in knots, trying to get a very simple perspective and sentence out, but approaching it from 4 different directions, and getting there eventually, by which time everyone had died of old age. Anyway, I've just done it again. It is the scene. It's when we say our prayers, and I also like the fact that book has a little pencil drawing in it, because those Peter and Jane books, you always find some kid had done a drawing or something in it. So I found that particularly real. I love Tommy's little cubbyhole with all of his stuff, but when he awakes and he goes, we say our prayers, and his brain is working so much quicker, and he eventually he doesn't even say the words, he just whispers them, and it's like he's realizing the enormity of it, and that little sort of plaintive whisper he does, which is, I can't quite believe I'm doing this, and I'm struggling to process it because the consequences of this are quite enormous, is a beautiful piece of acting, and I think it's such an unusual thing in classic Who. He's such an interestingly conceived character, and he's so well pulled off. I love Tommy, and I love John Cain's performance. I love the fact that John Cain was in Peter Brook's Midsummer Night's Dream and wrote Terry and June. So I love everything about this. But I think that bit where he reads the book is a really good piece of acting. I find it terribly moving, and really well done, and above and beyond what you kind of expect from Doctor Who. So welcome, but somehow special, somehow a little bit more. And in a story that's got a good villain, talking spiders, the Buddhist thread working through, John Pertwee being brilliant, Elizabeth Sladen being fantastic, Mike Yates getting his own sort of side adventure. The fact that you've got this beautiful character and this wonderful actor coming in and doing, and also not a quite often you watch a Doctor and you go, oh, it's that bloke from that thing, or that famous actor doing that. John Cain has his claims to fame, but I think most of us watching this don't have any baggage with him, really. I mean, I know he was in Peter Brook's Midsummer Night's Dream and he wrote Terry and June, but that's not really performance baggage that I in the same way that William Gaunt coming in to play against the No Place Like Home character that I knew him from, to be playing an assassin or whatever, or lots of the actors that we know from other things. I think John Cain is kind of a sort of blank canvas for us, so that Tommy is totally inhabited, and Tommy is a shines like a beacon of quality, I think, in those moments. Really special. So for me, it's the scene where Tommy, my favourite thing, even though I talked about it because I was trying to just add a little bit of perspective about how attitudes and ways of presenting things change, but that doesn't mean, because I think sometimes I read people saying, just because they did it that way, then that's not an excuse. Well, yeah, it is an excuse within the context of everything at the time. This was decent, benevolent people creating a nice character and doing it beautifully. We wouldn't do it like that now. That's okay. That's okay then, and that's okay now. And what that is, I think, is lovely. And it's a performance to cherish. That scene in particular. So yes, Tommy reading his book is my favourite bit of episode 4.
Now, part 4 has an amazing sequence in it, because I think one of the characters that kind of was quite profound to me in the whole series was Tommy. Tommy was a man with learning difficulties who basically lived at the monastery, the centre as such, and he was the odd job guy, and he was treated quite badly by people, badly by horrible people and nicely by nice people, because he had learning difficulties. So he starts off, and you can see that he feels things very profoundly. So he's trying to read in this scene, and he keeps looking at this the Metebelis 3 crystal, which he's stolen because he's a bit of a magpie and he takes pretty things. And he's looking into the Metebelis 3 crystal, and it clears the pathways of his mind and basically restores his learning abilities, as it were. And I hesitate to use the word normal because neurodiversity is a good thing. But what it does is it makes him intelligent, and he's able to read, and he's able to reason, and later on he turns out to be very important because of his resistance to the power of the spiders. And I found this very interesting, the idea that he was being the crystals were not evil. They had the ability to actually do other things. But I love Tommy. The character was really important to me for this show. Really liked him.
Yes, so so that actually means come part 4, it's 2-2. So I've still got a dog in this fight. Yeah, it was important to choose Tommy. I think that was a no-brainer. Even though, in an episode without that scene, and it is great, isn't it? The way he keeps sort of looking at the crystal, and of course, his being given Yates's appalling medallion earlier in the story. I like the way she describes him as a magpie. Sets up the idea that he likes shiny things. So that means that his taking of the crystal, is explained why he does that, but also without him being a sort of bad thief. It's that he's very innocently drawn to shiny things, so he doesn't, it's not like he's stolen it in the way that somebody who was up to no good will have stolen it, although the impact on the plot is the same, which is very, very handy. So I think that's all very nicely melded together. So, but in another in that episode without Tommy, there'd still be stuff the script going back and forth to explain about the spiders. Lupton I love the way that Lupton sits on the edge of the spider desk, and the relationship between Lupton Spider and the Queen Spider. So there's loads in that. I've got my mojo back. I've like John Pertwee's Doctor, I had a rough night, but I've woken up. I had a rough night in episode 3, and I've woken up with renewed vim and vigour in episode 4. So let's hope that can power me through episodes 5 and 6, which are largely the same episode, as we will discover. I do love Doctor Who. I mean, real credit to John Kane, who I think I'm pleased to be able to give the nod to in that episode. I think it's very, very lovely. And I think you're very lovely, listeners. So thanks for being here. Join me and Annie Wallace when we go to episode 5 of Planet of the Spiders on the next edition of Happy Times and Places. Well, I'm very grateful indeed to you all for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest is Annie Wallace, who can be found on Twitter at Annie Wallace. And I'm grateful to Annie, of course, and to the many patrons who make these podcasts possible. And they include Thomas Guerrier, Lisa Gledhill, Ginger Animator, Charles Gears, David Gillespie, Paul Gibbons, Mark Findlay Smith, Andrew Egan, Jeff Edwards, Andrew East, Paul Dykes, Drew, give me a surname, Drew, Tim Dickinson, Ian Dean, Shanti Day, Robert Davies, Hugh Davies, Chris Davies, Rob Dawson, Matt Dale, Paul Philip Dahlgren, Simon Curtis, Dave Cullen, Steve Cunniff, Lee Kremin, Philip Craggs, Peter Crocker, Ben Cowdell, Leslie Coots, Paul Cornell, Matt Corner, Martin Cook, Ben Cook, and Paul Colnaghy. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Did you like the sound of that bunch? Well, you too can meet with them in a basement and shout "Om" until I materialise a podcast and bonus material and all sorts of other things, which are patron-only treats for £3 a month or more. But the minimum is £3 a month, where you get advanced material, you get monthly AMAs, you get a podcast. Well, that's just for you. And you get your name mentioned in the credits. There are various tiers that lure you up the ladder, but most things are available at £3 a month, and you can even get a 10% discount on that, and indeed on all tiers, if you sign up for a year. But that means you're locked in the basement. I'm going to stop the basement analogy, because although it's appropriate for Planet of the Spiders, other than that, it just sounds really dodgy. So look, before I zap you with my blue lightning, you can just go to Ko-fi.com if you would prefer not to be locked in the basement, and there you can just occasionally put things in the cupboard under my stairs. You see what I'm doing here? And there's no commitment at all. You don't get any of the advanced releases or bonus material or all of that, but you just help to keep these going, and more importantly, to keep these, as the patrons do, ad-free, because I do not take any revenue to interrupt the podcasts with me pretending to like an item I've been paid to like, and then write an advert for that I then go, and I've got one of these too, by coincidence. Well, I've probably been given a free one, but I have to pretend it's good in order that you try and buy one. So I'm not going to do that. But by the way, my wallet is amazing, and you can buy one but do you know what I mean? So, I mean, to be honest, because honesty is not very good in advertising, these would be kept ad-free anyway, because I just don't like the idea of having adverts within them. But if you are a patron or a donator at Ko-fi.com, you justify that otherwise unsound business decision of mine. But this isn't really a business, is it? It's just a man talking because he's lonely. And if you want to praise my loneliness, you can go to Patreon. No, you can go to iTunes, and you can go to Podbean and all the other places on the internet where you rate, Spotify even, where you rate podcasts. 5 stars, please, and a couple of lines of review. That costs you nothing, helps me. It's getting very late, and what can I think of to say as part of this post-credits thing? Well, I've been watching a BBC drama. Remember, if you're not a patron, this is 6 months out of date. It'll probably be still on iPlayer, but as I say this right now, it's current, it's hot off the press. It's only on episode 4 of, I think, 6. And I've been watching a BBC drama called The Capture that I am enjoying very much, and it has an excellent performance from the actress Indira Varma as a sort of hard-nosed BBC Newsnight presenter, reporter type. It's got good performances all around. It's got Holiday Granger, Papa Essiedu, Ron Perlman, Nigel Lindsay, Andy Nyman, all sorts of great performance from Leah Williams as an inscrutable boss type. But it's really good. It's really nicely plotted. It's very enjoyable. Series 1 was okay. Series 1 was pretty good. I enjoyed Series 1. But Series 2 has stepped up a whole notch. I think it's slightly more accessible. I think the plotting is more compelling. Yeah, it's good. So that's all I'm saying. I'm watching The Capture on BBC One, and I haven't. Oh, hang on, because that's having. I'm now advertising something. I haven't been paid by anybody to say that. I'm just you like watching the telly I like, so I thought you might like it. Now it sounds like I've gone. Watch The Capture on BBC One and available soon on BBC iPlayer. I mean, I have just done that, but no money has changed hands. I've done that for free. God, so I haven't kept it ad-free, but I also haven't been paid for the advert I've done. I failed on almost every level there. If failure is indeed, as the doctor said, one of the basic freedoms, I'm as free as a bird. I'm soaring high.